There are couples the world watches from a distance, and then there are couples who quietly build something real while nobody is paying attention. Bunnie Xo has spent years sitting across from strangers, pulling out truths they never planned to say out loud. She has interviewed musicians, creators, survivors, and public figures. She has made a career out of getting people to open up. But there is one story she has never fully told. Not because she was hiding it, not because she was afraid, but because some things are too real, too layered, and too personal to reduce to a headline. Until now. Today, Bunnie Xo is finally speaking, not about the jelly roll the world built a fanbase around, but about the man she met before the Grammy nominations, before the sold-out arenas, before the transformation story went viral. The man she watched when the cameras were off and the crowds were gone. And what she has to say changes the picture entirely. Before we talk about what Bunnie revealed, you need to understand who she is, because that context matters more than most people realize. Bunnie Xo, born Elisa DeFord in 1980, did not grow up with a roadmap to the entertainment industry. There were no famous parents, no industry connections, no shortcut to visibility. What she had was something harder to manufacture, a personality that made people feel like they could breathe. She built her early presence on YouTube, where she spoke plainly, laughed loudly, and refused to pretend her life was something it wasn't. That kind of authenticity is rare in a space where image management is almost a full-time job for most creators. But Bunnie leaned the other way. The messier the topic, the more honestly she approached it. In 2019, she launched the Dumb Blonde podcast, a name that was deliberately disarming. The title carried an irony that anyone who actually listened would catch immediately. There was nothing dumb about the conversations she was having. Week after week, the podcast became a space where people who rarely said the quiet parts out loud found themselves saying exactly that. She talked to people navigating addiction recovery. She talked to people who had rebuilt lives after public failure. She talked to people carrying grief, shame, and complicated histories. And she did it without performing empathy. She actually had it. What makes this relevant is simple. When Bunnie Xo describes something she witnessed, she is not someone prone to exaggeration or performance. She has spent years in a profession that requires emotional precision. She knows the difference between what is real and what makes a good story. And she insists these are the same thing. So when she says there are things about Jelly Roll that the world has never truly understood, that carries weight. The year was 2015. Las Vegas. A concert that most people in the audience have probably forgotten by now. Jelly Roll, born Jason DeFord, was performing that night, but he was not yet the figure the world would come to know. This was years before the country crossover, years before the emotional acceptance speeches, years before his face appeared on magazine covers and late-night television sets. He was still an artist doing the grinding work of building something from the ground up, city by city, show by show. Bunnie was there that night. And after the show, they met. By her own account, the connection was immediate, but not in the dramatic, cinematic way those stories usually get told. It was quieter than that. It was a conversation that felt natural in a way that unexpected conversations rarely do. There was an understanding between them, an ease, something that didn't require explanation. But she was in a relationship. So they went their separate ways. That could have been the end of the story. A brief encounter that fades into a forgotten night in a city built entirely on things people don't remember in the morning. Except it wasn't. When that relationship ended, Bunnie and Jelly Roll reconnected. And this time, nothing stood in the way of what had already begun forming between them. Slowly, and then all at once, a friendship deepened into something more serious. But here's the part that rarely gets told clearly. When Bunnie made the choice to be with Jelly Roll, she was not choosing comfort or stability. She was choosing someone who, at that point, was living out of a van. Let that land for a moment. Not a struggling apartment. Not a tight budget with a fixed address. A van. Jelly Roll was doing everything he could to keep his music career breathing while navigating financial hardship that would have pushed most people to walk away from their dreams entirely. The gap between where he was and where he eventually ended up is not just inspiring, it is almost incomprehensible when you stand on this side of it. And Bunnie saw all of it. She didn't arrive after the breakthrough. She was present for the years when there was no guarantee a breakthrough was ever coming. At one point, she offered him a place to stay while he worked on music projects in Las Vegas. It was not a grand romantic gesture. It was just a practical human act of belief, the kind that says, I see something in you that I'm not willing to dismiss. That choice would define the entire foundation of what came after. By 2016, they had been together for roughly a year. And somewhere in the rhythm of concerts, late nights, shared struggles, and genuine friendship, something had crystallized. Jelly Roll was performing live when he made a decision that was not in any set list. In front of the crowd, under stage lights, with the energy of the room still vibrating from the music, he turned to Bunnie and proposed. No elaborate planning. No velvet box prepared weeks in advance. No carefully staged moment. Just a man making a real decision in real time, in front of real people, because he meant it and he was ready. Within hours, not days, not weeks, they were at a Las Vegas courthouse saying their vows. There is something worth sitting with in that detail. In a culture that turns weddings into productions and engagements into months-long social media events, two people who had both lived difficult lives looked at each other and said, we don't need to perform this. What they had was already real. The paperwork was just catching up. In 2023, they returned to Las Vegas again, this time to the same chapel where they had originally married, and renewed their vows. It was a quieter moment than the first, but in many ways, more meaningful. Because by that point, they knew exactly what they had survived together. And they were choosing each other again anyway. Not out of convenience, not out of habit, but out of a conscious recognition that what they had built was worth returning to. Here is where the story gets more personal than most public conversations about Jelly Roll ever allow. The world knows the broad strokes. Jelly Roll has been open about his history, the time spent incarcerated, the struggles with substance abuse, the years of making music in a genre that mainstream audiences initially didn't take seriously. He has told that story himself, honestly and without apparent shame. It is part of why people connect with him so deeply. But Bunnie's perspective adds a dimension that public storytelling typically leaves out. She did not see the highlight reel of transformation. She lived inside the daily reality of it. Jelly Roll came into their relationship carrying significant emotional weight, not just from his past, but from the ongoing work of fatherhood. He had a daughter, Bailey, from a previous relationship. And the process of being present for her, of doing the emotional repair work that complicated histories require, was not something that happened off stage and then resolved neatly. Bunnie stepped into that situation without hesitation, but also without illusions. She became a stepmother, not in the legal or formal sense immediately, but in the daily, practical, emotionally demanding sense. She was there, consistently, in the ways that matter more than any title. By multiple accounts, including public statements Jelly Roll has made in interviews, Bunnie's role in Bailey's life became something genuinely significant. He has spoken about the love she showed his daughter, the consistency she brought during periods of uncertainty, and the fact that she chose that responsibility when she absolutely did not have to. That word, chose, matters. There is a particular kind of love that does not arrive on sentiment alone. It arrives on decision. And Bunnie made that decision repeatedly, in small moments that don't make headlines, over years that the public did not witness. What Bunnie has described in interviews is a version of Jelly Roll that is fundamentally different from the one packaged for public consumption. Not because the public version is false, but because it is incomplete. She saw a man who worried deeply about whether he was doing enough as a father. She saw someone who carried guilt about his past not as a narrative device, but as something that lived in him daily and required real, ongoing work to process. She saw the space between who he had been and who he was trying to become, and she understood that space is not something you cross once. You cross it every single day. She also witnessed something less frequently discussed: the toll that public expectation places on someone who has built their identity around radical honesty. When your entire brand is authenticity, every private struggle becomes a potential contradiction to manage. Every bad day is a reminder of who you used to be. That psychological pressure is not something most fans consider when they stream a song or share a quote. Bunnie saw it, and she carried part of it with him. One chapter of their story that received some public attention, but perhaps not the depth it deserves, is their journey through IVF, in vitro fertilization. For those unfamiliar, IVF is an emotionally and physically demanding process that affects couples in ways that are difficult to fully articulate from the outside. According to research published by the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, couples navigating fertility treatment frequently report elevated rates of anxiety, depression, and relationship strain, regardless of the outcome. The emotional labor involved falls disproportionately on women, who undergo the medical procedures directly, but the psychological impact extends to both partners. For Bunnie and Jelly Roll, the process was particularly layered. They were already navigating the demands of a public life, a blended family, and the pressures of a career at full acceleration. Adding fertility treatment into that mix meant adding another source of emotional unpredictability to a life that already had plenty. They chose to share glimpses of this journey publicly, a decision that reflected both their commitment to honesty and their awareness that many couples walk through the same thing in silence. But even with what they shared, Bunnie has been clear: what people saw was a fraction of what they actually experienced. There were moments of hope that didn't go where they hoped. There were difficult conversations that never made it to social media. There was grief, the particular quiet kind that comes from wanting something very much and watching it remain just out of reach. And through all of it, Bunnie observed something about Jelly Roll that she says surprised her. His capacity for emotional presence during that time. His willingness to sit in the difficulty without needing to fix it or perform strength around it. That, she has noted, was not always the easiest thing for him. But he showed up for it. That kind of detail does not fit neatly into a public image. It is too specific, too ordinary, too real. But it is precisely that kind of detail that tells you who someone actually is. After nearly a decade together, Bunnie Xo and Jelly Roll announced their separation. The news moved through the internet quickly, as news about public figures always does. Speculation followed just as fast. But both of them, independently and together, pushed back on the noise. They denied rumors of infidelity. They declined to turn their private pain into public drama. And in moments that stood out for their unusual restraint, they spoke about each other with respect, even as they were navigating one of the hardest transitions either of them had faced. Bunnie described the cumulative weight of everything they had been through together: the IVF process, the demands of their respective careers, the emotional labor of maintaining a blended family, and the slow, quiet erosion that sometimes happens not through a single dramatic event but through years of pressure building in places nobody else can see. It was not one moment. It was all the moments, stacked up over time. Jelly Roll, for his part, was honest about the fact that Bunnie would always hold a significant place in his life. That was not a diplomatic line. It was a recognition of what she had actually been to him, not just a partner, but someone who had been present for the years when presence was the most demanding thing anyone could offer. What stands out in how they handled the separation is the conscious decision to protect rather than expose. In an era where public breakups frequently become content, where separation announcements are followed by interview circuits and social media posts designed to shape narrative, both Bunnie and Jelly Roll appear to make a different calculation. Some things, they seem to agree, belong to the people who lived them. Of everything Bunnie has spoken about, the thread involving Bailey may be the most quietly powerful. When a marriage ends, the legal relationship between a step-parent and a stepchild typically ends with it. There is no formal obligation, no court document requiring continued presence or care. The relationship, in most cases, simply dissolves along with the marriage that created it. Bunnie made clear that she did not see it that way. Her connection to Bailey, built over years of consistent presence, small moments, and genuine investment, was not something she was willing to sever because the legal and romantic circumstances had changed. The love she had developed for her stepdaughter did not come with an expiration date tied to a marriage certificate. She also spoke about the weight Bailey carried during the separation, the particular difficulty of being young and watching the adults in your life navigate change in real time. Bunnie was vocal about defending Bailey from online criticism that she felt was unfair and dehumanizing. Her message was direct. There is a real person behind every social media post and every comment section, and that person deserves protection, especially when they are still young enough that the world has not yet taught them how to absorb that kind of noise. This is perhaps the part of Bunnie Xo's story that reveals the most about her character. It is easy to love someone when the circumstances reward you for it. It is something else entirely to maintain that love when the original structure around it has changed. She chose to maintain it. So what is the revelation that Bunnie Xo has been quietly carrying all these years? It is not a scandal. It is not a secret that reframes a narrative in a dramatic direction. It is something more uncomfortable than that, because it asks us to sit with complexity rather than resolve it. The jelly roll that Bunnie Xo knows is not the one who fills arenas or accepts awards or delivers the kind of acceptance speech that makes the internet cry for 3 days. That version of him is real, but it is one dimension of a person who contains many. The version she knows is the man who lived in a van and still believed something was possible. The man who carried the weight of fatherhood through years when he was also fighting to become someone his daughter could be proud of. The man who sat through IVF appointments and difficult conversations and the quiet grief of hopes that didn't resolve the way he wanted. The man who, even at the end of a marriage, could speak about his partner without cruelty or ego. That version of him does not make as clean a story. It does not compress into a headline or a 30-second clip. It does not trend easily. But according to Bunnie Xo, it is the truest version. And maybe that is what she has always been trying to say, not just about Jelly Roll, but about all the people who sit across from her microphone. That the real story is always more than what fits in the public version. That the human being is always more than the image. The world knew a performer. Bunnie Xo knew a person. And to this day, most people still haven't seen the difference. If this story gave you something to think about, we'd love to hear your perspective in the comments.